What's up everyone, John from ARTV. I know you're probably wondering, shouldn't this be the American Idiot review? Why is this uploaded before the American Idiot review? Well, months and years down the road, you'll be watching these reviews and it won't matter at all, but for those wondering right now, there's two reasons. Number one, as you can see from the thumbnail, I have a very special guest for this review, and number two, next Thursday, September 29th, is my 7th anniversary on YouTube, and there are two videos dropping that day. I'm just saying, if I'm talking about American Idiot, what video might be dropping that day? Today, however, we're going to be talking about the 8th studio album by punk rock band Green Day. This one is called 21st Century Breakdown. Out of all of Green Day's albums, I would say my feelings have fluctuated on this release more than any of their others. It kind of goes up and down, and whenever I reviewed this record in 2012, about just over 4 years ago, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, and we're going to get into why that rating has changed more with time. Obviously, stick around to the end of the review where I get a little bit more in detail for that, but a 3.5 was very accurate for me at that point in time. It's gone up since then, it's gone down since then, and I do feel like even though those feelings have fluctuated, the start of like this year, I really started coming back to this record a lot, and there were so many songs that I was seeing as just underrated gems in their discography. I was coming around to some of the songs that I didn't even like as much before, tracks like Christian's Inferno and even Horseshoes and Hand Grenades, because that track did irritate me back in the day. I'm not exactly sure why, so I had a tendency to skip over it, but then I started gravitating towards it more, and I was loving just kind of the way that this track was centered. It's almost like you're unfolding some events at a bar one night, and Billy Joe's singing, "I'm not fucking around." Christian and Gloria are our two main characters here in this rock opera, and Christian and Gloria, of course, being representations, I feel like, for a lot of the youth in the culture being dissatisfied with love, life, the way that we're governed, and just politics, friendships, really everything. And there's also kind of a love story shaping this as well, a breakup going on some of these tracks, and we get some of the most beautiful songs that I've ever seen Billie Joe Armstrong pen. The rest of the band did a great job in incorporating some of these new elements. They brought about some outside instrumentation, some violins, a little bit of sampling and that sort of thing, like East Jesus Nowhere. And then of course I already mentioned Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. That's definitely a different sound for them, especially the intro of that track. And then moments like the underrated as hell Restless Heart Syndrome. I just feel like that's one of the best songs that Green Day have ever done. You will see in my top 20 that song just placing very high on that list. Do I feel like this album is a cash grab after the success of the rock opera that was American Idiot? Absolutely not. They went even more bombastic, way more over the top with this record. There's so many different instruments here, so many different styles. It was a risky move for them, especially clocking in at 18 tracks, some of these being longer as well. It's a lengthy listen, but it pays off. There's not really many moments where you're just kind of twiddling your thumbs wondering what's going to come next, because they're adding in so much more variety. You've got your more straightforward songs like Last of the American Girls, written supposedly about his wife Adrienne, and that's a fantastic little track. It's nice. It's not one of my favorites, but at the same time it gets the job done. And then you've got moments like Viva La Gloria, or even Before the Lobotomy, that have this nice little thing where they build up and then they have this epic payoff, and it just absolutely crushes you. Before the Lobotomy, definitely another one of my favorites on this record. I love the gang-style backing vocals on that track. Mike Dirnt in particular really standing out as doing a great job. Some of his best backing vocal work to date, I feel like. He's done a great job all throughout their career. He really understands harmonies and matching with Billie Joe's voice, just kind of offsetting that with another style without detracting from Billie's voice too much. And that's a hard art to perfect, the art of the harmony. And I feel like Green Day have always flourished in that regard. And we see that all throughout this record, honestly. He does a great job of really coming in and backing up Billie. And then on the track towards the end of this record that comes in two different parts, American Eulogy, we see Modern World, and we see Mike Dirnt singing that track. And I wish that Mike would get to sing more, because I love this song so much. They complement each other. If they even switched off on rotated lead vocals, and you saw that on American Idiot some, and we see him singing on part 2 of this track, Modern World, easily one of the highlights of the record for me. I could play American American eulogy over and over again, shouting along, "I don't want to live in a modern world." And that phrase right there really sums up what a lot of this record is about. It really hits home Billie Joe Armstrong using this as an outlet to vent his frustrations, especially about growing up in these different eras. We see it on that track, and obviously right off the bat on this record, right after the nice little faded intro, Song of the Century, we get 21st Century Breakdown, the title track, and Billie sings, "Born in Nixon, I was raised in hell," and we see those frustrations, and you're like, okay, this dude's not happy with the politics, he's not happy with the way things have gone since then, and just the state of our economy and our country, but I love that he kind of guises it with characters and that sort of thing, and we get to see it play out in his mind, and he's always done a great job of doing that. We see that on their new single, Bang Bang, as well. He gets into the mind of a mass shooter, which, as Billie said, absolutely terrified him. And whenever you're that good at doing it, it's just amazing to see someone keep writing songs and pushing themselves forward. The album really goes on a little win streak for me right after Christian's Inferno. I mentioned not really favoring that track all too much. It just feels a little bit more limited in what it has to offer, and I don't like the chorus on that one much at all. I have a tendency to skip over it. Right after that, starting with Last Night on Earth, easily one of the most beautiful songs that Green Day have ever put to tape. This song reminds me of that someone special in my life. This is a very important song for me and my girlfriend, so I love listening to this one, especially just hearing it in the past and it not really having a certain meaning for me, and then it just finally clicks whenever you're with that someone, like, oh, yeah, wow, especially whenever it connects to your scenario. So that's something that's really cool with that one. And then East Jesus Nowhere right after that, just switching back over to rage mode. Billie Joe was inspired to write this song after attending a baptizing ceremony for, I think, one of his friend's kids. So that was really, really cool just to see him flying off the handle at politics, religion, and just really bringing everything into the mix. No one is safe. And then the track Peacemaker, taking those European and Latin influences. And I love how he's just kind of roaring on this track, and the guitars, the acoustic guitars sounding so fast-paced and fantastic here. Easily one of the most experimental and best payoffs that Green Day have ever done. Okay, enough of that for now. I'm cutting myself off here. I already ran longer than I wanted to, but I have so much to say about this record. Let's go ahead and bring on Mark from Spectrum Pulse. This is
21st Century Breakdown.
Mark, I think you got the wrong series there, man.
Oh, I don't think I have the wrong series at all. I think it is just absolutely perfect. It's usable for any occasion here.
Whatever, Mark. Yeah, you know, you actually are the one that came up to me a few months ago and said that you had interest in discussing 21st Century Breakdown with me. So, what brought this album to your attention so much, and what made this stand out that you wanted to discuss it years later?
Well, here's the thing, like, as much as you can probably hold up American Idiot as Green Day's best album, although I think Kerplunk gives it a lot of competition, 21st Century Breakdown was probably the first Green Day album that I found myself loving entirely outside of the hype. Especially considering that a lot of people don't really have fond memories of this album, not in the same way that they would for Dookie or Insomniac or even Warning in some cases. This album is kind of in a weird place for Green Day, and for me, I get why, but I still absolutely adore it.
Right, and that kind of echoes some of the points that I was bringing up in my intro there. It's funny that you bring that up, with some people not having as fond of memories of it. And I was kind of one of those people that was a little bit let down whenever the album came out. I was in high school at the time of its release. I was about to graduate, and I remember getting my hands on it and feeling like it has the same things. I should like this, the same themes of like a rock opera, politics, and just even more bombastic, over-the-top themes. And I should like this more than I actually do.
Well, I think the problem is, I think there's a number of issues going with this album, because while I admit I adore this album, it is flawed. There are issues when it comes to how it presents a lot of its themes, and I think one of the big elements is that in tradition, it's not really a punk record, not the same way that previous albums were. It was drawing so much inspiration from the Beatles, from The Who, in terms of the scope. You would expect a lot of the songwriting to follow suit. It was trying to go for that rock opera. It had two characters, Christian and Gloria, and that the more you go into this album, there's no real sense of narrative the same way there was with American Idiot. It's a lot harder to follow. It's a lot harder to piece together.
It's very loose in that regard, because it brings these characters into some of the songs and they're directly referenced at several points in the album, but other than that, it's kind of up to everyone's perception, and you can take it as this song being about either Christian or Gloria, but I feel like it's a little bit more like referring to or speaking to, I guess, the general public in the United States.
Oh, I would agree with you totally. I think in terms of Christian and Gloria, they're archetypes. For Christian, it's the sense of fragile, bruised, oftentimes shattered male ego that wallows in its own self-destruction, whereas Gloria is the figure that's trying to do good, trying to abide by the straight and narrow, and realizing that in 21st century, most often that's not going to happen.
There's a lot of things that get in the way. Drugs.
That's the thing, like religion.
Yeah, exactly.
Guns, lots of guns.
Lots of guns. That's something that we see, and it's weird kind of how they split it up. I mean, we see recurring themes throughout the album, but as you know, this album is split up into 3 different sections: heroes and cons, charlatans and saints, and then finally horseshoes and hand grenades. What do you see, like, difference-wise between these different sections, and why do you think they split it up that way?
I think they split it up that way in terms of some of the thematic ideas of each section. Heroes and Cons is very much establishing the base archetype. You have the people that are being held up as heroes and trying to differentiate them from people who are really just lying their asses off and having that illusion of authority shaken. That's one of the main things that runs through songs like Christian's Inferno, just basically his own self-destructive collapse.
Right.
And then the funny thing is that when you get into Charlatans and Saints, you start realizing that for as much as Gloria is trying to uphold ideas, and to some extent Christian is, they're trying to hold on to quintessential American ideals, namely the Bible, the gun, the pharmaceutical industry, things that try to keep them stable in the modern era. They feel like they're charlatans, and oftentimes just trying to hold that sort of idea, even while everything's collapsing around them, they end up becoming saints out of it. And Horseshoes and Hand Grenades, it really encapsulates the element of this album that for the longest time I didn't understand, because the last part of this album is easily the most scattershot, confused, and outright disjointed that you will encounter. It's violent, it's graphic, it goes off in weird directions. As Billy Joel Armstrong singing, "I'm not fucking around," but what is he fucking around with?
I compared this song to kind of like, almost like you see him kind of rallying the troops at like a bar or something like this. It's kind of like one of those bombastic songs that has that tenacity about it, where it seems like you're just trying to get everyone like a fire lit underneath them. But then we transition from that into something a little bit more calm, and then definitely calmer with a little bit more explosive of a chorus with 21 guns. And then we see something more like American Idiot with the track American Eulogy, which is split into multiple parts. And that's easily one of the most fascinating parts of this entire record. And of course, this section, Horseshoes and Hand Grenades, as well.
The funny thing about that is that for the longest time, I always thought the third section of this album was by far the weakest. Like, I loved the second part so much because, you have East Jesus Nowhere, my favorite song on the album, which is Peacemaker.
I'm so glad we agree on that, Mark. That's amazing.
Spaghetti Western song, fantastic satire of hyper-violent masculine emotion there. Calls back to both the spaghetti Western side of things, graphic as hell, and some lines that don't quite make sense when you think about them, but they sound great together.
Exactly. The way they roll off the tongue on this track behind the instrumentation, I don't even know how to describe the instrumental on this thing, because I feel like it's got everything from Spanish to European influences, and the way that it's kind of like he's like rolling, the roll of the tongue kind of going in the background, and then the shout of these acoustic guitars, just so fast paced on this track. I didn't even know what to make of it the first few times I heard it.
Oh, I agree with you there. But let's circle back to, let's stay on themes here. When it comes down to Horseshoes and Hand Grenades, the funny thing with that song, where you're drawing out that he's leading that rallying charge, I buy that. But then, as you get to songs like Static Age, and you realize he's got that so much additional confusion. He's hammering on the TV, he's trying to get something on the radio, but all he gets is white noise. And so he thinks the only option is to lay down his guns, but then he's realizing, I don't want to live in the modern world. That's the eventual line that come after it. You get a situation that these guys, they're now so trapped by the confusion and the competing messages that the idea at the end of the album is just seeking clarity. Or in other words, see the light. That's all they want to do. And even that's one of the things I think holds this album together, despite all the wildly competing ideas and influences beneath it. Because this album goes off in so many different directions and tries to make so many points. But the funny thing is that when it's all blurred alongside together, so many of the points are contradictory anyways, that all they want is clarity. Green Day's biggest strength consistently throughout their entire career has been able to capitalize on confusion.
Absolutely.
And that's a 21st Century Breakdown gets down to the modern 21st century people of our generation, and how basically with so much white noise being thrown at us, hell, they predicted Twitter before it was a thing.
I think I something that is really interesting what you brought up about that is the fact that I see Contradiction as being a huge part of not only Green Day's career, but in this album's success, really. It's kind of contradicting itself often, and Billy Joe will often write in the form of like oxymorons or like open-ended questions or statements that just constantly contradict themselves, whether it be within one line or one or two lines back to back. And that's something that I was thinking about earlier, and I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, because that's one of my favorite things that Armstrong's able to accomplish on this record in terms of the writing.
Well, the thing is that it intensifies that tension, that sense of frustration in a lot of the poetry. And there's so many elements of it that just kind of run at cross purposes to each other. He's got his polemics. East Jesus Nowhere is probably the biggest middle finger to the Christian establishment I've seen in a while.
Oh, yeah.
But in a year where you have so many contrasting narratives, I think 21st Century Breakdown becomes all the more relevant the further we get, and the more political and the more polarized our society gets. The people who just want to live their lives in the middle and find some sort of solace, it becomes all the more relevant to people of our generation. That's why I think this album has actually had some staying power in the way that Uno, Dos, and Tres really haven't for me.
No.
Like, it went for this great bombast. It overreached. And for a lot of the boomer punks, they basically said, like, okay, they're going for all these big ideas, but they're not really making much of a point. But in the modern generation, there are so many points being made that ultimately contradict each other, and people in our generation just looking to find clarity out of the white noise. And what I like about this album is that they don't really find an answer.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why.
There's no solution at the there's like they want the solution at the end of the record, but it doesn't truly wrap up in the form that you think it's going to. Like you were saying with American Eulogy, and then of course with See the Light, they want to find this peace. They don't want to live in the modern world, but they want to come to peace with it. But I don't think that anybody, Christian or Gloria, and obviously them speaking for society in general,
Us.
or else Armstrong, us exactly. I don't think that we find that. And like you were saying, there's many reasons as to why there's so much confusion and delusion in the world that keeps us from finding all of the answers, especially as we get more and more things to kind of cloud our judgment.
Exactly. I would completely agree with you there. But the funny thing is that this is a theme that Green Day have touched on before. What I like about the ending and what I like about See the Light, as you said, it's a callback to American Idiot. Not just in the sonic palette, but in terms of a lot of the themes as well. Because basically, what happened when Jimmy eventually came home at the end of it all, he didn't have answers. The girl was gone. He was just left stewing in himself again. A lot of this album falls into a similar narrative, except Christian and Gloria just realized the only thing they have is each other. Bit utopian.
Right.
One other example of why they don't want to live in the modern world in a simpler time. But it makes a certain amount of sense. It also makes a certain amount of sense given how much basically Billy Joe Armstrong worships the Beatles and the Who throughout the entire course of this album. Like Last Night on Earth is basically a Beatles song.
Exactly, and you also, I found it interesting that they have on the deluxe edition of this record, there's a Who cover that was recorded and included.
Really?
I was about to ask if you had heard that before. I found that really, really fascinating. It's actually a really enjoyable cover. So Mark, kind of wrapping everything up here, what were some of the most standout tracks for you, and maybe a few low points that you just found yourself maybe not enjoying as much with time, or ones that you may have initially not liked and you found favor with later on?
The thing with this album is that it really alternates in terms of points on that I really like versus stuff I don't. Like Peacemaker, I have always loved. East Jesus Nowhere, always been on board with it. I like 21 Guns. I don't care what anyone else says. Although I will say that there's a part of me that likes the Broadway musical version of that song a little bit better. Just in terms of how the harmonies are done, I think it's really, really good. But beyond that, songs I don't like, I'm not wild about Christian's Inferno.
Wow. It's really weird how you're kind of just echoing some of my thoughts, and I'm glad that I brought you on for this, because it's interesting to see somebody's perspective. I feel like on a lot of Green Day releases, we have very different opinions, but on this one, genuinely my least favorite track on this is Christian's Inferno, and I feel like it lacks a strong chorus. There's something, I guess about the way that the narrative is told here. I don't care for the manic laughter at points in this track. It just feels a little bit distracting for me. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I don't think it's a bad song, and it doesn't have like an instrumental that I hate by any means. It's just that there's elements that make it not work for me.
Oh, I get why it's there. I get it, like, in between the lobotomy, which
Right.
is actually happening. It makes sense of why it's there, but honestly, the song just feels a little underwritten. For the longest time, I didn't like Murder City. I've warmed a little bit more to it now, given that I know what it's trying to do. For the longest time, I hated See the Light. I thought it was just a terrible way to end the album. I thought it was really slow. I didn't think it really. I think it was trying to recap what the original title track did, and I don't think it did it well. But honestly, I've come around a lot to it just recently, trying to be able to encapsulate the themes and capture things a little bit more. The last song I didn't really love in the same way. Probably it might be what's it called? Restless Heart Syndrome.
Oh, really? How did you feel about that one initially?
The song is trying to get into like Dead and Dies, pharmaceutical abuse, sort of thing like that. I get what it's trying to do. I think its placement is really the problem, coming right after Viva Gloria.
Yeah.
Both of them, Viva Glorias, are fantastic.
I completely agree.
Love both those songs. But Restless Heart Syndrome, it drags a little bit on the back half. It doesn't feel well placed within the album. And I think it probably could have afforded to come... Like, it came right before Peacemaker and like right after East Jesus Nowhere. I think it'd be so much stronger.
I can see where you're coming from and share some of your sentiments there, but actually I would place Restless Heart Syndrome right up there with Peacemaker in terms of my two favorite songs on this release. Honestly,
really?
This song has really, really hit me over time, and I love how the track kind of starts off more just like on the piano keys, and we see it just slowly adding in a drum rhythm, and then of course the explosive guitar solo. I love the track and how it's kind of like dealing with this, like you said, a prescription drug abuse, and we see kind of a meltdown, not really knowing what to do with oneself, and I love how it plays out, and it's referencing even the first single from this record, Know Your Enemy, which is not one of my favorites on here at all, in fact, one of my least favorites for me, but I love how it uses the line, no, I am my own worst enemy, know your enemy, so know that you're the problem sometimes, and then that guitar solo kicks in. I love the way that this track goes out.
I don't deny that the song is good. And once again, I don't think there's a single bad song here. Even there's parts of Christian's Inferno I like in terms of how it's structured. Restless Heart Syndrome, I just think it could be better placed within the album. The one song I want to talk about that I think we've mostly brushed over, Static Age. 2 key changes in one song. This song, it has snuck up on me. It is a sleeper hit on this album, but I still adore it. There is just something about the way it's written. And again, Billy Joe Armstrong has a way with words that don't quite make sense the way they're structured, but I love that chorus. It's got an old school Ramones-esque vibe to it. Really kick-ass.
I love that little guitar pattern that they throw in right at the end, the fast drum right after he sings, and this in the Static Age. It's perfect. I absolutely agree with you on the chorus. And for the longest time, and still, honestly, some of the verses feel, compared to the chorus, don't feel quite as strong for me, but you have to admit that chorus is really just absolute perfection.
I absolutely agree.
So, Mark, in terms of a rating, I'm sure since a lot of your viewers have never seen you cover this album, of course, they're wondering about a rating for you. What would you say for 21st Century Breakdown?
Light 9.
Wow. Okay.
No, I hold this album as one of Green Day's best. I think it's easily underrated by a lot of people, and I think time has been very kind to this album. In terms of other records that Green Day have put out have aged a lot worse than this album. I think they had a lot of ambition with it. I think they approached topics and ideas that were scattershot, yes, and yes, again, this album is flawed, but I think the flaws are overshadowed by the so many things that it does right, and some of the best ever hooks.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with that, and like we were talking about before, that's something that we've circled back to time and time again, talking about some of the strong choruses on this record, and for me, Initially, whenever I reviewed this record, I believe I went with on your scale, it would have been a strong 6, light 7. But since then, I've been persuaded with some of these elements that you've been talking about, just the songwriting, the thematic elements here, and I also like just the bold choices of using outside instrumentation on this record and mixing it up from American Idiot. So for me, on your scale, I'm going strong 8 out of 10, and of course on my scale, that's a 4 out of 5.
Well, it's well deserved. This is a good album, and I only hope that when Green Day comes back, they show the same sort of ambition with their upcoming album, and they don't feel a need to regurgitate elements of the past. Like, as much as I appreciate these guys are a punk band, they've always had a knack for calling back to some of the elements of the classics that I really hope they can carry over.
I completely agree with you, Mark. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. If you guys have not subscribed and checked out Spectrum Pulse's channel, it's going to be linked in the description down below. Album reviews, a weekly series called Billboard Breakdown, where he talks about the Hot 100, and what else do you do on the channel, Mark? What is it? Music, movies, art, and culture.
I talk about movies very sparingly. I got my special comment series where I basically rant about cultural idiosyncrasies, major events, occasional crap that happens on YouTube. They're regular, just a couple steps above a drama channel.
Yeah, Killer Keemstar over here. Well, you heard it here, guys. Go check out Mark's channel. It's linked in the description down below. I hope you enjoyed our review today, recapping our thoughts on 21st Century Breakdown, Revolution Radio. Their new record is out October 7th, and I will see you guys next time.